Hi, my name is Samira and I'm a product specialist at YouTube. For many creators, turning their passion into revenue is an important aspect of the YouTube platform. I'm here to explain how ads work and debunk some of the myths that are floating out there. There are three key players when it comes to YouTube monetization: the viewers, the creators, and the advertisers. From a viewer perspective, we want YouTube to be the best place to find and enjoy entertaining content. From a creator perspective, we want YouTube to be the optimal platform where you can produce content your audience loves, and for those who choose to and qualify, a way to earn money too. And from an advertiser perspective, we want to provide a safe environment for them to reach their target audiences with precision. These three players work together. Creators build the audience, advertisers buy ads to reach that audience, and viewers watch your videos with relevant ads. And then you get paid. Let's dive into this a little deeper. After joining the YouTube Partner Program, you can turn ads on in YouTube Studio and earn money. We suggest you select all ad formats as your upload default so that you can maximize on the type of ads served. However, you'll want to be sure you only select videos to serve ads that comply with our advertiser-friendly guidelines. Advertiser-friendly content is appropriate for most audiences and does not feature sensitive topics like drugs, sexually suggestive content, or hateful content. There are many more examples of content that is not advertiser-friendly, so check out our content guidelines linked in the description for more information. Content that's meant for more mature audiences can still make money on YouTube, but you'll likely see less revenue from ads. And as a reminder, all videos uploaded to YouTube must comply with our terms of service and community guidelines. Once you've turned ads on, they will be served on all of your eligible videos and you'll earn revenue from this. The ads displayed on your video are automatically selected based on many factors, including things like your audience, video metadata, and whether the content is advertiser-friendly. Next, I'm going to show you the different types of ads that may appear next to your videos. One type is display ads. These appear to the right of the feature video and above the video suggestions list. Another type are overlay ads, which are the semi-transparent ads that appear on the lower 20% portion of your video. Then we have bumper ads. These are non-skippable ads that must be watched before your video can be viewed and last 6 seconds or less. Other types of ads include skippable and non-skippable video ads, and sponsored cards which display content that may be relevant to your video. And there are also mid-roll ads which can be served during longer form content. Ad revenue is a great source of income for many creators. Think about how you can make videos that resonate with your audience and are suitable for advertisers. If you've enabled a video for monetization but don't see ads on it, try using our video monetization troubleshooter. And check out the Creator Academy to learn more. Bye for now.